Hey everyone, it's Tim here, and before we begin today's episode, I just want to acknowledge the COVID-19 situation, which is rapidly changing and affecting all of us around the world right now. In fact, the situation has changed so fast that many of us are now facing lockdowns in our countries and have been forced to move all our teaching online in a very short space of time. While the changes may seem daunting, teachers around the world have embraced this new reality, and while finding the transition exhausting at times, we're hearing many reports of teachers who are enjoying the experience. On the blog, we've got our expert roundup of online teaching resources, and our YouTube and Facebook streams will be of particular interest to those of you teaching with Zoom and exploring multi-camera setups and software like ManyCam. And over at topmusicpro.com, we've released a brand new online teaching workshop for our members, and I'm recording as many tutorial and problem-solving videos there as I possibly can. If you've got any questions, please reach out to us on social or email support@topmusic.co. Rest assured, the Top Music community is here to help support and guide all of you through this challenging period. Keep up the great work, stay positive, and I hope you enjoy today's episode. Welcome back to the Topcast, your weekly home for inspiration, lesson ideas, and support for your music teaching studio. You are listening to episode number 187, and I'd like to extend a very special welcome to all my Top Music Pro teachers out there. Before we get into today's topic, just a reminder that my blog, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, podcast, and Top Music Pro membership platforms are all jam-packed at the moment with helpful resources that we've been sharing since March on online teaching. If you've still got questions about this topic, then we've probably already answered it in one of our resources, downloads, guides, or videos, and we'll probably do so in today's show as well. So do check us out at topmusic.co and via our social media channels. We're delighted to be in a position to support you during these challenging times. Today's show notes and full transcript are now available at topmusic.co/episode 187. In today's episode, as I mentioned last week, we're sharing audio from a webinar that I conducted about online teaching with two amazing professionals, Noa Kageyama A.K.A. the Bulletproof musician, and Dr Noa from the MET Opera Orchestra. And the reason this came about was Noa actually reached out to me because we were both supposed to be speaking at MT&A this year, which sadly, of course, was cancelled. And so Noa reached out after he'd been getting more and more requests at his blog, and the same at Rob's, about online teaching. And he thought, well, why don't we put together a bit of a webinar to address some of these questions that he's getting, and to help make the move to remote teaching a little bit more effective and positive for teachers around the world. So that's how it all came to be. And it was great to receive feedback after the webinar. We had about 2,500 teachers online, which was quite extraordinary. And one of the comments we got back just out of the many was from a professor of percussion at Minnesota State University, said, "Thank you for the excellent information. I've forwarded this week's blog post to our music faculty who are all scrambling to make sense of how to create online lessons. Very helpful and informative." So I thought this would be a good opportunity to share the answers to some of these questions, which we'll be covering in today's show. How important the right setup and equipment may or may not be in order to teach effectively. And a bit of a spoiler alert, you definitely don't need fancy gear, as many of you have worked out. The biggest change you'll probably need to incorporate into your teaching when you move things online. We'll also be talking about some specific ways in which learning to teach online will make you more effective as a teacher. We'll also talk about how students can be encouraged to take a more active problem-solving role in online lessons and be more engaged in their learning. Two basic approaches to teaching online, the importance of testing things before you do it, how to deal with lesson notes, audio, what's the best video platform, all of these kinds of questions. That's what we're covering today. My guests are Noa Kageyama, A.K.A. the Bulletproof musician. You can find him at bulletproofmusician.com. And make sure you also listen back to episode number 21 of the podcast, which was all about performance anxiety, which of course is Noa's specialty. And my other guest today is Dr Noa. He's a percussionist from the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra, and they're both based in New York City. Rob is at robnopper, knopper.com. Let's take a listen.
I'm totally a technology nerd, and so I would be happy to get into the technology side of things. But as I was starting to read what people have written about teaching online, I started wondering if the question of technology and teaching was a little bit like technique in music making, as in our technique is supposed to support our music making and it's not an end in and of itself. And so maybe rather than getting into the technology side of things first, Tim, I wonder if it might be more important to talk about the structure and workflow of an online lesson first, and then how this might be different from an in-person lesson and how technology can then be used to support the teaching process in that new format. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I want to just say from the start too that the technology shouldn't be a barrier to anyone trying this, because we can all do online lessons with the technology that we already have. You do not need to go and buy anything, really. If you have a phone or a laptop, you can get some software and that's it. That's all you need to get started. So I don't want to concern people about the need for overhead cameras and lots of software and all that. You don't need any of that stuff. And I think I'd be right in talking today. It's really interesting to see the poll. So we've got about 63% home-based teachers, 25% college, and some grade school teachers as well. So hello to everyone, by the way. Great to have you here. I think my focus and my approach today is going to be about doing an emergency or a quick transition to online, getting started online. So we could talk, if there are questions later on, about more complex technical setups. But I think to start with, it's just about, okay, how do we make the most of this period of time that is really odd and we're all feeling a bit weird, and make the most of it by going online, and how do we get started with that? Now, your question was about teaching workflow. So for teachers who are making a transition now to online lessons, you don't need to change all that much about how the lesson flows. So if you would normally, have a student come in and they would do their technical work first, and then maybe play you some music, and you would give them feedback on that, that being a very simplistic overview, and maybe finishing the lesson with either something creative, or maybe they need to prepare for an audition, so they need to do oral tests or theory or something. That structure of the lesson can remain as it is. You don't need to revolutionize anything there. What is difficult and will take time is language use, and making sure that the words you're using actually work at a distance. So you can't, of course, just kind of point to things particularly easily that students are doing and pick them up on it. You may find it hard until you get the student's camera in the right position, and that should be something that you should do. We can come back to this later, before their first lesson. You're going to waste a whole lot of time in that first lesson if you don't get their setup right. So making sure it's in a position where you can see what their fingers are doing. Otherwise, you're going to be teaching and, where you could have just stood up out of your chair and looked over their shoulder, now you can't do that. So how do you actually go about working out whether they are using the correct fingering in a particular scale or something like that? Maybe they need to call out the numbers of the scale that they're using, or move their camera. So it's more, for me, it's less about completely changing the format of a lesson. It's more about having to really rethink how you go about explaining things. And I would also say, and the people I've interviewed have all said, talk less and do more in online lessons. So if you can possibly demonstrate something rather than talk about it, that's going to be great. And I've seen there's a few questions about teaching younger students. The thing that is going to make younger students switch off and be a real challenge is the more you talk. So try not to talk too much. So that's just a quick overview. I'm sure we'll go into a little bit more detail about things, but that's been my approach, particularly for people who are just starting. Use the same method books. Just make sure you've both got the same method book so you can refer to measures and page numbers, and more or less go through the process that you were doing in person, just moving it to online, and you'll soon realize some of the things you need to rethink about how you say things and how you refer to the students' music as well.
It sounds like one of the things you're encouraging is patience with ourselves.
Absolutely. Go easy on yourselves, guys. And the other thing I've been hearing, the more teachers have started to do this, is they're coming back at the end of their first day and going, oh, I am exhausted. This is so tiring. And it really is, because at the moment, you're worried about the technology. So there's always this thing playing in the back of your head, even if it's working quite well. You're focusing so much more on what's going on because you have to be so much more attentive and switched on. You're changing all some of your language. You're learning so fast as you go. So guys, we're already stressed and anxious. Be calm. It's okay if it doesn't quite work. You're going to have lessons where the students can't connect and it just doesn't work. So please, let's all give ourselves a good big hug and a pat on the back for giving this a go, and just go with the flow. It will start to get better the more you do it.
And maybe this is actually a good time to ask, I don't want to call it a silver lining, but are there unexpected positive aspects or benefits of teaching online that teachers can maybe look to anticipate experiencing as they get more comfortable?
I think there's heaps of positive that comes out of this. And I would be really surprised if a lot of teachers who don't try this stick with it, at least for a few students. Or another benefit is that you could consider it as something to add on to your business. For all those home-based teachers running their own businesses, I spend a lot of my time sharing business ideas and helping teachers with their business. This is a great opportunity to diversify a little bit your studio teaching by continuing to do online teaching with other students around the world. You can teach in all sorts of time zones. You can teach students at all different levels and ages. And the other thing is that one of the approaches that I use in marketing that I like teaching teachers about is to find what student really makes what really gives you a buzz, what kind of student, and try more and more to teach that kind of student. I know you guys would be doing the same kind of thing. So for me, I love transfer students. I love teaching teenagers. That's my jam. For other teachers, it's preschoolers or adults, whatever it is. But you'll find that you can find many, many more of those perfect, amazing students if you have the world as your area of teaching. So that's why the online thing can really be a big boost to people's business and give them flexibility and diversify that income base. So I think that's a great positive. Here's a really simple one. If you haven't thought of this one, you'll actually get to see them in their home studio and see their setup and how good or bad it is. It's often a real shock when you see them and they're sitting on a pile of books or something and everything's the wrong height, or they're on their bed, whatever it is, with a keyboard. So I'm sure our teachers out there are better teachers. They would have fixed this by now, but I'm being a bit silly. But you do get a chance to see where they're sitting, how it all works, where they are in the house and things like that. So I think that's a simple one. Their students can be more comfortable often, but sometimes that can also be more distracted too. So just keep that one in mind. If there are brothers and sisters running around, or mum or dad is cooking in the kitchen and that's right next door, then again, you're going to be learning these things as you go. And I think... And other teachers have told me the same thing. Online teaching actually makes you a better teacher. It really does, because it really forces you to focus on what you're trying to achieve and the simplest, most clear way to get there. So I've had a lot of teachers say, I really feel I'm a better teacher. Even if I go back to in-person lessons, I'm better for having done this.
Is there any chance you could share an example of do more, talk less, and maybe these things are related? I wonder if you can share an example, if one comes to mind, of how something changes a little bit when you're teaching online and how you're a little bit more effective with your words or efficient relative to how it might have gone in a normal face-to-face lesson?
Yeah, I think because words, the students can start to get distracted the longer you speak. Just demonstrating what the outcome is that you want to achieve from a particular passage can be much more powerful than saying... So what I would perhaps do, so there's a few different things you could do. In an in-person lesson, you might go, okay, well, the articulation wasn't quite right here, so let's work on that one, and we need to make sure that we crescendo and decrescendo through these two bars. You could say that. Or in an in-person lesson or an online lesson, you could say, okay, well, how was that out of 10? What could you improve about that? And let's try and fix just that one thing when we play it through next. Or... in an online sense, or an in-person lesson as well, you could do this, is just to go straight in and demonstrate. So you could go, you know what, I really liked how you played that, but I'm gonna do it again now, and let's see if you can pick a difference between these two ways of playing. Can you tell what I'm doing differently to how you did it? So that's a simple approach. You can use that in in-person lessons as well, and I really like to do that one because it really makes them listen. The other thing is you very quickly find out if they are actually listening to themselves, which students often forget to do sometimes because they're concentrating on getting things so right. And that's where in a in-person lesson, recording on if you've got a digital instrument can be great because you can just play things back. A little bit harder over on an online lesson. But that's the kind of thing I think is important about online lessons is doing some demonstrating more and having them listen and watch you as much as you can. I'm also thinking about things like just playing a simple scale. If you're looking for a particular, let's say, to improve a legato, playing or something like that, we could, or to correct the fingering, rather than just saying, okay, well, you need to remember to use your fourth finger on that C sharp in the D major scale. You could, particularly if you've got an overhead camera view, you could say, okay, I'm going to play this one, watch me now, and see if you can find out something that you're doing that's different to what I'm doing. I liken it to when we were kids, those black and white line drawings that had, something that was, you had to pick the differences in the two of them. Kids really like that. It's like a little investigative challenge. So simple things like that. And one thing that does work really well online is a call and response isn't quite the right thing, but a copy me or play what I'm doing by listening. So you could say, look, I'm in an A major position on the keyboard, 5-finger pattern, and I'm going to play something and I want you to try and play it back. That's a really simple thing that you can do online that still works really well and is great for their listening.
What I find interesting is it sounds almost like you're enlisting the students into a more active problem-solving role, which I imagine would translate into their own ability to teach themselves when you're not in the lesson, becoming better practicers in essence. Yeah.
And I like asking them questions rather than telling them what's wrong. And I'm sure many of the people watching do the same thing. It's so to try and get them to listen to what they've done and to know what's different about that compared to what they want to achieve. Now, they have to then have an idea of what they're trying to achieve. So even with my kids, one's learning guitar, one's learning trumpet. Before they play, I say, okay, we're going to replay this Mary Had a Little Lamb, whatever it is. What are you going to try and achieve? What are we going to try and improve this time? So play through once. Okay, what can we improve? What wasn't perfect? What could we do better? Oh, the notes weren't well articulated. Okay, that's what we're going to work on this time. Let's try it again. And just keep going back to them. How did it go? And I'm sure this isn't my own kind of teaching. I think I've absorbed this from other places, but I think you can definitely continue to do that with online lessons. And it's very effective because hopefully you want them to do the same thing when they practice, because all that time spent without us, they have to do that. Otherwise their practice isn't going to be very effective. I'm preaching to a practicing guru here, by the way, so I won't say anything more about that, Noah.
I'm not sure if this is premature to get into, but I was reading your colleague Brenda Hunting's post on practicing from a couple years back, and not being a teacher in that sense, this was like a revelation to me, but it's probably obvious to people who've already been teaching online. The idea of, instead of starting off a lesson with a run-through, to instead have the student record in advance and then review that recording together as like a screen share. That made perfect sense to me, but I never would have thought of that. I wonder if you can say more about that, or how that works, or who it works for, or and I think, Rob, this is how you have taught as well, and so maybe you have ideas.
Yeah, and Rob, you do this, I would imagine, mainly for older students, probably more advanced students?
Yeah, generally college through anyone taking orchestra auditions or college auditions or something like that. And for me, it's not only percussion, it's kind of more general, any instrument.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think you need to keep in mind that there are two approaches to teaching online. One is live face-to-face lessons online, and the other is a video recorded style of lesson. So they're called video exchange lessons or asynchronous teaching, whatever you'd like to call it. So you can go one of two ways. And I think what I've been talking about up until now is live online lessons. And I think they are the most effective for up to pre-college, I guess, kind of level students, so high school students. Because unless they are really committed students and really passionate about what they're doing, you are going to get more benefit from, in my opinion, from the face-to-face kind of style of teaching. The video exchange process works really well for adults of any level and works really well for college and more advanced level students. And so in that process, you don't have to connect through Zoom or any kind of platform like that. All you do is you ask the student to make sure their setup is nice and clear. They play through their piece, whatever they're playing, and then you can do one of two things. You can either then record yourself talking about their playing, and so you could have on one screen, you could just take a capture of the screen, so record what's going on the screen, and on that screen have their video playing. and then a picture of you on your webcam next to it, and then you could talk through and you could pause their video and say, okay, here's what you need to do, and you could turn to your piano and play that. So you could do that and then send them that recording. Or indeed, as you've just mentioned, Noah, as Brenda mentioned, you could actually do that live. So you could grab their recording and then say, okay, we're going to connect next Monday. You come on a live session together, and then you do the same kind of thing. A lot of the software platforms, I know we'll probably talk about those later, allow you to share your screen. So you would share your screen, image of you with your piano and their video, and you play through it. You could talk about it as you go. I think for teachers who are just transitioning during this tricky kind of period, I would, at least at first, go for the live face-to-face style lessons, unless you're teaching adults who are happy to record themselves or more advanced students. Because the other thing is that mainly works if students are playing a complete piece or two or three, rather than they're just still at the infancy stages of learning a few bars of a whole lot of pieces.
I have a question about that. Well, I have done some of those. It's not exactly video exchange. They'll submit a video or audio, and then we get together in person. I mean, on video, not in person, on video,
okay. Right.
But live. And I'll screen share and play the audio and video back for them while we're looking at the music together and talk about it that way. It sounds like it's kind of a hybrid of the two you were talking about. I'm not sure. Yeah. Have you tried that? And is that, how does that compare?
Yeah, to be honest, I haven't personally tried it. I've only heard about other people using that as a format. And actually my teacher, now that I think about it, my teachers, when I was doing more upper level work, have done that for me. And I find it quite useful, but I find it more useful watching the recording again afterwards, because I wanted to keep stopping and then going to the piano and trying out the thing that they said. And then, so I would, if you're going to try one of these two methods, so you've got the live lessons or video recording style. If you're going to do the video recording style, I'd probably keep it simple. Just ask the student to send you a recording of their playing and questions they have. Then you record separately a response to that, and then you send it back to them. I think that's probably the easiest way to go, rather than stressing about, okay, I've got a screen share, I've got to bring them into the screen share and show their video. It could just get really complicated. And again, I'm really conscious of teachers who are already feeling a little bit out of their depth with some of this technology stuff. Keep it simple, just to start with.
Yeah, that's a good point. So I want to ask another question, kind of just about the basic logistics of how people should get these online lessons set up. So say you have a student who wants to continue their lessons. You're worried about what the video and audio quality is going to be like. Should you test it out ahead of time? Should you test it with yourself or a friend? Should you actually set up a separate session with the student, like a 15 or 20 minute session with the student to set up all the video and audio stuff with them? And what do they have to do, and what do you have to do to prepare for that?
Yeah, it's a great question, Rob, and it's easy to forget that you need to do this. So when you're going to go online, you need to prepare for it, because particularly if you haven't done it before, the technology may be challenging at both ends. So you've got a two-sided issue here. So I would recommend, if you are okay with your first online lesson with the student being quite disruptive and you may not get much done, then that could be your first lesson, just getting started. If you really want to get started and have an effective first lesson, then you need to do a test run first. I would recommend anyway. So for a first step for teachers, I would choose what platform you're going to use to do the conferencing, and then get your end set up. So all these platforms have a way to test that your audio and video is working. So make sure you're okay. And then grab a friend or family member or anyone at all really that's not in your house, and connect with them on a call. So learn how to get them a link that will allow them to connect with you. Then what you'll do is you'll be able to instantly see what's going on at the other end and the kinds of things you'll need to worry about for your student. And that is, most importantly, can you see their piano? So when your friend's just doing this, you'll be able to find out what it looks like when you're looking through an iPad at them or a laptop or whatever it is. And you could get them to kind of move it around. And if they happen to have a piano, brilliant. You can try to experiment with different placements. So I would do all of this before you even teach that first lesson. So you have a little bit of confidence and you know how the connection works. So that's step one. Then step two is to do it with an actual student. You may need to phone them first and be on the phone while they're getting their computer sorted. A lot of kids these days are better than us at tech. So most of them will be able to connect and you'll be able to see them. The biggest issue is actually getting it set up in a position that will work for you to see the keys or the instrument that they're playing. Now, so for piano, the standard position is if I'm facing my piano, if I look to my right, normally at about eye line, angled down onto the keys, tends to be a good measure for where you want to put it. Now, getting it up there, whatever it is, their phone or their iPad, preferably an iPad or a laptop because phones are pretty much too small for them to see, can be a challenge. So they need to prepare for that as well. So some of these things you can actually tell the student about before you begin, and I think that's a good idea. And you can have a generic form that you could send all the parents or the advanced students saying, hey, here's the software we're using. This is how it works. You're going to get this link. Here's some tips about setting up your computer. What kind of computer do you have? Do you have a laptop? If it's a laptop, great, because the screen can angle and hold itself in whatever position you need, and you can put it on a chair or a table or a stool, and you'll probably get it sorted quite easily. If you've got an iPad or a tablet, a little bit harder. So again, just giving them some tips, and there's plenty of resources online about letters that teachers are currently sending parents about this. So I would, in answer to your question, yes, definitely sort this out first. Expect that your first lesson could be a bit weird and a bit unusual and maybe not as productive as normal. Again, give yourself a pat on the back for giving it a shot. It's okay that it's a little bit rough to start with. You're trying something you've never perhaps done before. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, totally. Everybody has their own little checklist of things that they need to work out at their first lesson with their student or when they're getting a new student started. And why would an online lesson be any different? It's just that checklist of things to remember to do is just a little bit adjusted now. You have to figure out the cameras and the mics, and there's just going to be a little transition, it sounds like you're saying. When I was in high school taking lessons, my high school teacher would draw out these really interesting illustrative examples of concepts he was talking about, or he'd write out exercises for me. And he actually had a carbon copy where he would rip off the top copy, give one to me, keep one for himself. I'm wondering how you deal with something like that, taking notes or writing exercises during an online lesson.
A good question. So for quick changeovers to online lessons, the simplest thing, you've got two options. Either the student writes the notes on their side in their book and you guide them or you dictate to them what you would like. Mm-hmm. Secondly, you take the notes locally and then just take a photo of those notes and send it to the parents or the student afterwards for reference. Mm-hmm. Or slightly more technical, if you have another device that you can type into, then you could write it into a Google Doc and you could share that with the parents or the students. And you could just keep adding to, I used to keep adding to one Google Doc, so like a notebook, and it would always be shared with the parent and the student, and they could just keep on, I'd just add new pages at the top, and so they could also see what was behind as well. If you want to get more technical, then with your setup, you can screen share and you can share. So what I do is I'll have my iPad. You can plug, for example, an iPad into software like Zoom and get it to show up on your screen and the student's screen. And you can annotate scores. You can write on things. You can do diagrams if you wish. And those things can be saved or sent to the student afterwards by email. Yeah. But look, again, keep it simple. If the student has an assignment book, then get them to take the responsibility, if they're old enough, to write down the things that they need to do. If not, you do it and then just send it to them. That would be my suggestion to start with. What do you guys think?
It reminds me a little bit of this concept of Kaizen, which some people might be familiar with. So in the context of changing exercise behavior, for instance, if you tell somebody you need to start working out 3 times a week, 20 minutes a time, because you're going to die soon if you don't start exercising, even with your life at stake, the adherence rate is really, really poor. It's just really difficult to get started. And so this one physician had his patients, instead of exercising 3 times a week, he's like, well, I know you watch Jeopardy every night at 5 p.m. Every time Jeopardy comes on, I just want you to march in place for 30 minutes or not 30 minutes, sorry, 30 seconds.
Right.
And then you can sit back down and watch the rest of the show. And then after a few weeks of that, it's like, all right, every time a commercial comes up, just stand up out of your chair again, march in place for one commercial or two commercials, sit back down. And then after a few weeks of that, it became easier to, for the entirety of the commercial break. And then when the Jeopardy's over, go walk to the end of the block and then back. And so eventually it just cultivated this habit where each little tiny change was so trivial that it didn't lead to any kind of anxiety or stress about doing anything new. And I get the sense that it's a similar thing with this perhaps, where the smallest, easiest, most trivial changes that you can make from one week to the next that would enhance all your lessons eventually can start growing. 1% better every week could start leading to meaningful changes a month from now, 2 months from now, and so forth.
Yeah, and we don't quite know how long we're going to be doing this for. So you will definitely, things will get easier, things will improve. I've seen there's some comments in the chat. There's someone who's been teaching for 15 years online. I interviewed yesterday someone for my podcast who's been teaching for 10 years online. So there's a lot of people out there who've been doing it for a considerable amount of time. Just keep in mind that they have had many years of practice and they've had many years of investing in equipment and setups. When they started, they would have started simply. So just avoid looking at what they're doing and going, oh my goodness, I need to have 4 different camera angles and lighting setups. And that you don't. Just start simple. That was what I'd say.
Cool.
So I hope you enjoyed a taste of this fun webinar that I did with Noah and Rob. They are such experienced professionals. I really felt quite honoured having been invited to join them for this. And then to experience such a huge crowd of teachers and get so many great questions. It was really awesome. Next week on the podcast, we're chatting to the aptly named Tony Parlapiano all about his approach to music teaching, which he calls interest-based learning. Definitely a man after my own heart. Next week, we share lots of ideas about teaching teens and transfer students in particular. And this is going to be a great encore to next month's theme of teaching teenage students. I'm Tim Topham, and you've been listening to the Topcast from topmusic.co. I'll see you next time. For more information about this episode and to find out how to enhance your own teaching, visit topmusic.co. You'll find everything you need for your studio, from lesson plans to cheat sheets, quick win teaching ideas, and guides on how to build your teaching business. Plus, you'll be connected to a global community of the world's top music teachers. And when you're ready, join hundreds of other teachers around the world by becoming a Top Music Pro member and get access to all our bonus content and courses, including an extended cut of today's episode. And don't forget to follow topmusic.co on social media and subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen to it. That's all for today. We'll see you in the studio.